Well, hello and a warm welcome back, dear friends. It's Hans Peter again. I quote, "Awaken from the faint in which you sleep, and in that very moment you will triumph over all adversaries." End of quote. This is an inscription on an amulet from the mummy of a priestess, the pharaoh Ekntats. And this amulet was found on the Titanic. If it really was the Titanic and not the Olympia, that's another topic entirely. You could make a whole video about that. But today, it's about something completely different. Just imagine, dear friends, even just for a moment, what it would mean if the so-called Western Wall, the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem, were simply an ordinary Roman wall and nothing more. A wall like you could find in any other city. It's said that this wall was built under the ruler Herod Agrippa II. Was constructed. Well, the name Agrippa already points to Rome. Agrippa is a Roman name. So whether, if he ruled, this man was actually of the origin as described, that's questionable, but that's what's claimed. He was also raised at the Roman imperial court, according to history. So Herod Agrippa was raised at the Roman imperial court. He was a Roman, a man appointed by Rome with royal status. And his story, well, who attests to it for you? By Flavius Josephus, who is said to have confirmed it. And here, in my opinion, we already have the first really big problem. Why? I consider Flavius Josephus to be anything but a trustworthy historian. Why? He himself was descended from the very people we're talking about. And he was absolutely determined, come hell or high water, to prove that his people were the first on earth. That's what he claimed, and that everything originated from this people. We know that kind of agenda, don't we? That's familiar to us. Of course, he didn't succeed in that. He was obsessed, truly obsessed with the ideology, and that makes him biased. And that's evident throughout all his writings, including what concerns Yeshua. That's why I don't consider Flavius Josephus to be a trustworthy historian. On the contrary, he was determined to prove that this one people is the chosen people and, basically, that they invented everything in the world. Yes, so, here it's about ideologies and narratives that were created. Herod Agrippa. This ruler was supposed to have been the grandson of an Aristobulus. He, in turn, was the son of the so-called Mariam I and Herod the Great, as we know him by that name. But we know that today we can certainly question the existence of Herod the Great. See my book, The Brothers of Jesus. Even what we refer to today as the Herodium, there is not a single archaeological proof that Herod ever lived there. But it is claimed there is no porcelain, no inscription, no plaque. There is nothing on which the name Herod appears. Nothing, absolutely nothing. And yet, people still claim it. Aristobulus was indeed the brother of Alexander, and their mother was the noble Mariam, as I previously mentioned. Tragically, they were supposedly executed by their very own father. The true identity of Aristobulus and Alexander, I reveal that in my book, The Brothers of Jesus, because each of you will know them all too well. Well, in any case, they're not Jewish princes, that's for sure, even though people like to claim that. Also, check out my video number 317 in the Jesus series. There, I explain in detail what Herod was really all about. Because Herod was never actually a name. If anything, it was more like, well, how should I put it? Maybe a nickname, okay, an epithet. Herotz in German means nothing other than hero. That's what it means. Egyptian Herod, German heroes. We also have the word heroic, and in English, hero. Herod the Great is also said to have persecuted Jesus as a small child. And we know the exact same story, thousands of years earlier, from Herod the Great of Egypt, who pursued the whorish child. So, in that respect, all of this is very questionable, what has been written here. But what if, now it gets really intense, the temple in this city, on which all religious narratives and claims are based, none of which have a single extra-biblical piece of evidence, wasn't even located there? What if? What kind of geopolitical firestorm would that actually cause right now? What kind of religious Pandora's box would that be? If that's true, that's what we're going to look into now. What if, dear friends, the whole story had actually been different and it's just a narrative that was created to assert claims, claims for which there isn't a single extra biblical piece of evidence, claims that supposedly justify everything going on in this one country? What a disaster that would be, dear friends, if it came out that a historical framework had been constructed here, made up of borrowings, misplacements, distortions, and half-truths that never actually happened that way. You know, you just have to repeat a lie long enough until it becomes the truth. And there has been plenty of time for that. So why is the story of the real King Solomon so important, so crucial, so geopolitically and historically, in my view, truly fundamental? That's what it is. What do you think would happen if the arguments from my new book, which has just been published, King Solomon, Brace Yourselves, and his temple in Spain, were discussed in the media, on all channels, on history networks, at universities, or in history classes? That would be a bombshell that could change a lot in the world, that would bring peace, nullify supposed claims, and strip the false priests of their legitimacy. I think that would be huge, don't you? In particular, I also refer here to my book Isaac and Rebecca, my latest book, The 12 Tribes, and hold on tight again, Sandfly, or rather, The 12 Tribes of Ireland and Scotland. And the Rosicrucians knew that too. That alone is already a world-shattering revelation like no other. And if the earthly evidence hadn't already been enough, I can also admit that Solomon himself and the Queen of Sheba spoke to us and asked us to retell their story. That's how it was with all my books and their protagonists, and that's how it was now with King Solomon as well. It was their very own hints that they gave us, that guided us, that led us, that enabled us to once again find a few needles in the haystack, all of which support our theses. But not only that, dear friends, just before we finished our investigation, it was incredible, truly, and the completion of the book. Then something came into our lives, a 9-year-old boy who remembered, or still remembers, having been King Solomon in one of his past lives. An aspect of his soul seems to have been King Solomon, and that aspect revealed itself. And he came into our lives after we had actually finished everything. The whole book, all the research was completed, and then he appeared. And you'll hardly believe it, but the boy really didn't know anything about it. He also didn't know who King Solomon really was, where he lived, or what happened. He didn't know the biblical story. He just remembered and started to tell us. And what he told us was incredible. We also share that with you in the book. And in fact, it's incredible. It confirmed all our research and investigations, and even added a few missing pieces and some small details. It was truly unbelievable. But I'll tell you all about that in detail in my book. Today, I want to give you a few examples of facts. Today, we're talking about facts that are presented in great depth and detail in the book King Solomon, where they are also thoroughly explained and justified. I'm just mentioning them here. But as I said, if anyone asks, how do you know that? Where did you get that from? I explain all of that in detail in the book. So, pay attention. I've researched, for example, that, e.g., King Solomon is said to have lived 24 generations before Joseph, the father of Jesus. Well, King Solomon is supposed to have lived around 1000 BC. Okay, fine. So that's almost 1,000 years in between, about 950 years, if you consider the average age for fathering children back then was around 22 years, just by the way. But with a male protagonist, for 24 generations I only get 528 years before Joseph. Not 1,000. With 24 generations and 1,000 years, each protagonist would have had to father a child at about 40 years old. Each one. Every single one. That's not possible. So these numbers aren't correct, but we've corrected them. Okay? And we're going to show you that, because I actually found out that King Solomon didn't live in 1000 BC, but in the 7th century BC, century before Christ. And after I found this passage and now take 700 divided by 24, whoa, we get a completely different age. Then maybe you should know that the Arabs at that time found King Solomon's table somewhere. The Arab Tariq found it in Toledo, Spain. And that really got to me, because we knew that King Solomon's temple was found in Spain. Is it just a coincidence that King Solomon's table is also in Spain, specifically in Andalusia? The Arabs also found records in Andalusia about King David and King Solomon. There, The records were not found in that one country in the Middle East. Okay, you could say that at some point they were shipped over or someone brought them there. Well, but maybe they were there from the very beginning. That's a question we have to ask ourselves. And when we put the clues and pieces of the puzzle together, it actually forms a clear picture. For example, we know that these Sephardic Jews immigrated from Spain at the time, and in the Bible they are known as the Ibri. Even today, we still call Spain the Iberian Peninsula, but they only appear much later, specifically after the reign of King Solomon, so it is highly probable that they truly did bring his remarkable story from Spain all the way to Canaan. Basically, as this people were searching for their identity, they brought stories from other countries, relocated them, renamed them, and retold them. We know this. This is nothing new. This has happened in countless stories throughout history. It was the same with the story of Odysseus, and that's actually pretty well proven. You know? And if we look at the images of King Solomon, but also of King David, they're depicted with flowing hair, curls, and light skin, sometimes even reddish blonde. Why do people do that? The ring that Solomon wore is said to have been given to him by the archangel Michael. And that completely rules out that he ever served the storm and war god, the bloodthirsty and vengeful god Yahweh. The archangel Michael has nothing to do with Yahweh. According to the scriptures, Solomon's ring was thrown into the sea by a demon named Asmodai. Well, but now there is no sea in Jerusalem, where we had located Solomon's temple. But in Kiz, there's yet another clue. Because it turns out that Solomon's grandfather was named Isai. If you know the historical context, the name Isai will leave your jaw on the floor. And it's said that the name of the tribe Jesse also comes from the word Isai. And this legendary tree stump Isai or Isaid is also attributed to King David, Solomon's father. So, who exactly was Isai? The goddess Isais, the goddess Izar, the goddess Inanna, also known by those names, was anything but a follower of Yahweh. When Isa appeared to the German knights Roderich and Emerd, she presented herself as the sister, the beloved divine sister of Jesus Christ, and claimed that she was indeed her. And where did she appear? In Carthage, which was a Phoenician colony, Phoenicia. And what was going on back then? Cadiz in Spain? Celtic Phoenician, just a coincidence. The Phoenicians were extremely active in Spain, my friends, and they even built a temple there. But they were also active near Israel, specifically up in Canaan, in what is now Tyre. Tyre. Where does the name Tyre come from, the one founded by the Phoenicians? The capital city, where the enormous temple of Melkart stood, with the two pillars in front, Jachin and Boaz. Tyre is named after the ancient, powerful Germanic creator god, Tyr, and nothing else, which is still clearly reflected today in the ancient rune known as Tiwaz, which is widely recognized as the rune of victory. Break time equals 0.5s/. And in Tyre, for example, there was also an identical temple, just like the temple of King Solomon in Cadiz, identical in construction. If you look at the reconstructions, they are identical. Why? Because they had existed long before and were known as the temples of Melkart. Later, the Romans renamed them as temples of Hercules. And this one, yes, they simply attributed it to King Solomon in that one city. Which isn't true. It's an invention, a story straight out of 1001 Nights. Once again, David's grandfather was named after the goddess Isai, Isa. Very clear and obvious. And she also informed the Templars that the God of the Old Testament was pure evil, completely contrary and diametrically opposed. Would Solomon's grandfather have ever named himself that if he had followed Yahweh? Certainly not. Everything speaks against it. It is also official that these pillars, which stood in front of the temple, Jachin and Boaz, left and right, were imitations, nothing but imitations, made by Crum, that was the name of the artist, a Tyrian artist, so once again made for Nizia. And similar pillars also stood at the entrance of the famous temple of Melkart, in Cadiz, and in many other places. There were also one or more in Germany, as well as in Tyre. And from Tyre, which goddess was born? Europa. Coincidence? Also the temples of Melkart of the Phoenicians. These were the original models and images for Solomon's temple in Jerusalem, and they are much older, because even ancient historians attest that such temples already stood there as early as 2700 BC. And who were the best friends of the Phoenicians? Who traded with them? Who lived together with them? Just like the Celts in Spain. They were closely allied with the Phoenicians, also in Carthage. They traded and they also fought side by side. Coincidence again, Tyre, Tur, Tif, all the same name for the ancient Germanic creator god, but also the model for the later Zeus. I'll explain all of that to you in detail in the book. And what is Noah called? For example, in the Sumerian cuneiform texts, again Tur, Tif, Twas, also called Tershu in other countries. That is attested, it's historically documented, you can even look it up on Wikipedia. They have no problem admitting it, because people can't recognize the context. Zoe and Noah were called Sutra in the Sumerian cuneiform texts. Wow, I thought, that's a message, that's a really intense message. And by the way, the goddess who was born in Tyre was called Europa. She was the namesake of today's continent, Europe. That's a reference to the origin, where Tyre comes from. The temples of Melkart, as I said, already stood in Tyre as early as 2700 BC. And the Phoenician city names like Gaza, oh, we know that one all too well today, considering what's happening there, Ashdod, Ashkelon, or Tyre itself. These are Indo-European terms, and the word Indo-European doesn't even really exist, because there's no such thing as Indo-European. One should actually say Proto-Nordic. Indo-European is a distortion of the true word. In English, it's distorted even further by saying Indo-European instead of Germanic or Germany. It's really odd. This is how, quite deliberately, historical falsification also works through twisting words. As I said, in Indian there are no terms for him. In Indo-European, there are no terms for elephant or any of the animals like lion or monkey that live over there. But there are words for wolf, for roe deer, for stag. That's pretty telling, isn't it? We know that the Phoenicians were a huge seafaring people, something that didn't exist in the Mediterranean before. They originally came from the area of the North Sea and the Atlantic, and they brought their knowledge with them to the Mediterranean. That's nothing new either, right? But of course, classical history as taught in school denies this. Why? Well, maybe people might start to figure out what really happened. And of course, that can't just be revealed so easily. And even classical historians who have studied, of course, they can't just talk about this openly in public, because they also serve the system and they know their limits, how far they can go and are allowed to go. In that respect, I'm actually glad that I didn't study history or archaeology, which I originally planned to do as a child, because then what I'm doing today wouldn't be possible for me. It simply and plainly wouldn't be possible for me. Yes, I did study as well, but my studies were practical and self-taught since my childhood, and to date we have the result of that. Yes, I just wanted to give you a little impression and a small insight into the Book of Solomon, which has just been published, and his temple in Spain. We have a lot more evidence, clues, and proof in there. Read through it, take a look at it. I believe that this book, just like, for example, Isaac and Rebekah, as well as Akhenaten and Nefertiti, and The Path of Initiation, are books that really should be taught in the future at universities, schools, in public, on history programs, or even on major TV channels. Why? Because it turns our worldview upside down, because it changes our consciousness, and because it would also cause religions, as they currently exist, to collapse within their framework due to the history that has been falsified. And I believe that would be a huge breakthrough. That would be a major breakthrough for humanity, for its consciousness, and for its realignment. With that in mind, I want to sincerely thank you for watching and for listening. All the best, and let me know in the comments or by email how you feel and what you experience after reading the book. See you soon. Bye.